Welcome to Grow Virtually, an online horticultural educational program presented by the Master Gardener Volunteers of Cobb County. Under the guidance of the University of Georgia Cooperative Extension Service, we grow gardeners.
Speaker, JoAnne Newman.
Thank you for joining me today for our presentation on bulbs. And one of the reasons I decided to do this program is because I love bulbs and because in 2009, our first full fall in Georgia, after being inspired by the gorgeous spring displays around some of the apartment complexes here in the Smyrna Vinings area, I planted more than 300 tulip bulbs in my front yard. In the spring of 2010, though, not a single one appeared. Not only did they not bloom, but when I started to investigate, I didn't find a single tulip bulb under the ground. What happened? Well, we'll talk about that later. I also learned that some plants sold as bulbs, in quotation marks, are technically not bulbs, but tubers, rhizomes, or corms. However, each type has a similar characteristic. Their stems grow underground, or to use a fancier word, are subterranean. So this is what we're going to cover today. The different types of bulbs and examples of each, how to select them, when to plant them, what are the proper conditions for care and for gardening success, and I've given you some resources to help guide you. So what are the differences and why is it important to know? Well, let's take a look. Bulbs are herbaceous perennials, and these are plants where the above ground vegetation dies back annually, but the plant persists through its underground parts. They have a very short stem wrapped in thickened fleshy bulb scales, which are actually modified leaves. The scales are the primary place where food is stored. The future flower is protected by the scales and the leaves. At the base of the bulb is the stem, to which the scales and small leaves are attached. And at the bottom of this is the basal plate, where roots emerge when the bulb is planted. A healthy basal plate is important for a healthy plant. The outer layer on a bulb is dry and papery, and it is called a tunic. And the tunic helps keep the plant from drying out. Daffodils, tulips, and hyacinths are said to be layered and all have tunics. Lily bulbs do not have tunics. They're called scaly bulbs because they have loose, short, and fleshy scales. And I'm going to show you a picture. So this is a photo of a lily bulb, and instead of a papery tunic surrounding the bulb, it has fleshy, fat scales which surround the stem. Some of our favorite seasonal flowers grow from bulbs. What would be spring in Georgia, especially in Smyrna where I live, without daffodils, also called narcissus and jonquils, along our road medians and front yards? And if you've never been to Gibbs Garden in Ball Ground, Georgia, it's worth a field trip to see the huge numbers and varieties of daffodils on display there. And of course, tulips come in such a fabulous variety of colors and shapes, and certainly increase the tourist business in the Netherlands. Okay, so here's a trivia question for you. What country has the tulip as its national flower? And don't look at your phones and don't do a quick Google search. And don't type it in the chat box or the question and answer box. You will not get a prize. So just think about it for a second. Okay, everyone first thinks of the Netherlands or Holland, and that is true. But the tulip is also the national flower of Iran, Hungary, Turkey, and Afghanistan. And while the Netherlands put the international marketing and cultivating of tulips on the map, actually tulips are native to Central Asia and Turkey. In the 16th century, they were brought to Holland from Turkey and quickly became widely popular. And today, tulips are cultivated in Holland or Netherlands in great numbers and in huge fields. And we'll talk a bit more about them later. Lastly, are the spectacular lilies, and they have all sorts of symbolism associated with them going back to ancient times. So let's move on to the next classification, tubers. Tubers are a swollen underground branch or rootstock that contains a supply of stored food. Tubers have eyes or buds from which stems are produced. This is not the same as a bulb, whose stem is surrounded by leaf scales. In order to divide tubers, you need to be sure that each section has a growth bud or eye in it. And the most common tuber we know is probably the potato. Popular flowering tubers are also cyclamens and caladiums. Within tubers are also plants such as daylilies, dahlias, and sweet potatoes, where nutrients are stored in the roots, called tuberous roots. And these plants form root clusters, and the buds are produced at the bases of old stems. When you divide a tuberous rooted plant, you need to be sure that each section has both roots and shoots. As you can see from the photos, tubers come in a variety of shapes and sizes and can grow in clusters like daylilies and dahlias. So here is my very crude drawing at showing you the buds or eyes on a potato. In order to grow more potatoes from potatoes, you need to be sure that you include an eye for the plant to reproduce. And we all know what they are when we're peeling or scrubbing a potato. Those are the things we don't want to eat. So what types of flowers grow from tubers? Dahlias, as I said, daylilies, and tuberous begonias all grow from tubers and give our gardens some great displays in the summer. They come in many varieties of colors and sizes, and the great news is that with proper care, they multiply and last for years. The next group are called rhizomes. And a rhizome has an underground perennial stem that is horizontal in position and is very rich in starch. They can often be confused with roots. Rhizome stems contain nodes and internodes, which roots do not have. Their growth habit is different. They grow horizontally, extending from one plant to another. They often lie on the surface of the ground or just below the surface. Why is all of this important? It's important because we need to understand how a plant grows in order to properly plant, grow, and divide them. So you will be a green thumb bulb grower rather than a brown thumb bulb grower. And here are some examples of flowers that grow from rhizomes. The spectacular bearded iris, most bountiful tall and tropical canna lilies, and the short and sweet lily of the valley. The UGA publication on bulbs, which is inside your chat box, has a handy chart at the end to help you determine which plants are suitable for your yard and when and how to plant them. The last category of plants we're going to talk about are corms. Corms are also underground stems, but unlike the rhizome, they typically grow erect or straight up. Corms are short and fleshy. They have a tunic like a bulb, but unlike a bulb, the inside is solid. One or more buds grow leaves, stems, and flowers above the ground, and it roots from the base. And here are some examples. And yes, that is a 4-year-old boy standing behind an elephant ear in my backyard this summer. The crazy thing behind that plant is that I thought I had dug up the corm completely last year and transplanted it above the retention wall where it would have more room to grow and would not look like something from the Little Shop of Horrors. But unknown to me, some of the corm was still left in the ground and back it came. We had no idea it was going to get that big. The bulb was originally transplanted there from another part of my garden where the leaves never got bigger than about 8 inches. So of course I figured that was the size. Wrong. What was the difference? Soil. This big baby sits inside a bed of rich mushroom compost and garden soil, while its mama plant was planted in the native soil with a splattering of mulch on top. And although it's quite the conversation piece, it's quite a distraction, frankly, and shortly it will be dug up again and moved to another roomier spot. They can get so big that we even had a vendor at our annual plant sale and expo that uses these leaves as molds to make interesting tables and other decorative items. I think this leaf alone in the picture would seat at least 4 people. At the other end of the size spectrum, though, are the short and early harbinger of spring crocus, and lastly, the stately, gorgeous gladiolas. Gladiolas are best grown for cut flowers. They're not recommended for outdoor perennial displays. And again, the resource guide that we've given you a link to will help you choose which plants are best for your garden. So now that you've learned about the different types of bulbs and how they grow, let's talk about planting and care. One of the great things about buying and planting bulbs is that because bulbs go dormant after their active growing period, they can easily be stored and shipped pretty much anywhere as long as they're kept cool and dry. And if any of you have been to the Amsterdam airport, you know what I mean. It's the only airport I have ever been through where there are more bulb sellers than food or boutique stalls. That may be an exaggeration, but they certainly do stand out there. So what do I plant and when do I plant? Different varieties bloom at different times of the year, and many bulbs that bloom in the spring require a certain amount of chilling time to grow. Bulbs can also be forced or stimulated to grow in pots, as is shown here with this amaryllis. Most bulbs get what they need in Cobb County, but tulips may be a problem. Here in our area, tulips need to be treated more like an annual. And the reason, well, there are several. As I indicated before, tulips originated in Central Asia and prefer a climate of cold winters and hot, dry summers. Not exactly what we have here in Metro Atlanta. In locations with wetter, cooler summers and or warmer winters like ours, they don't tend to do as well. Therefore, it's important to ensure that you do as much as possible to keep your bulbs within their natural environmental conditions. They can, however, be given a bit of help to avoid disappointing results during the spring. And the secret is to pre-chill the tulip bulbs in your refrigerator before planting and treat them as an annual bulb. Chilling tulip bulbs in the refrigerator mimics the cold nights found in cooler areas such as Holland, where tulips grow in abundance. Cooling tulip bulbs is important. Without chilling, the resulting flowers will be short and small. And because of our mild winters, tulips rarely come back for more than a year or two. Though some gardeners try digging the bulbs up and re-chilling them, experts report that this generally doesn't work very well. So I've included a link to Walter Reeves's website. If you're not familiar with him, he's one of our go-to gardeners, former extension agent. And he has a piece on tulips in case you love them like me and really want to beat the odds. But was that what happened to my 300 tulips? Nope. More on that yet to come. Pay now or pay later. These are the words to the wise in selecting bulbs. You need to choose bulbs that are firm and do not have many nicks or bruises on them. No soft and mushy ones. Be sure to purchase from reputable mail order companies or local nurseries or vendors where you can see and feel them. Open the packages right away and keep them in a cool, meaning under 60 degrees Fahrenheit temperature, and dry place until you are ready to plant. If you decide to store them in your refrigerator or in a cool garage, be sure not to store them in plastic bags where they can retain moisture and rot. Paper or mesh bags, peat moss or vermiculite-filled containers will reduce the chances of destroying them. So when do I plant? Spring flowering bulbs need to be planted when the soil temperature is below 60 degrees. The sooner the better. Don't leave them around for months. But how do I know what the soil temperature is? Well, you can get the soil temperature information from the website shown here, and I believe I put it in the chat box as well. It's weather.uga.edu. When you get to their main menu, you enter your zip code and it'll display the nearest weather stations and the data. Scroll down to get the soil data. Interestingly enough, it does not give soil temperatures for Atlanta. So select another close station. A few days ago when I checked, Dunwoody was the nearest station to me. The soil temperature was at 2 inches, 64.3 degrees, at 4 inches, 62.3 degrees, and at 8 inches, 61.6 degrees Fahrenheit. Not quite cool enough to plant, but getting close. And word to the wise, if you move to Atlanta from points north like I did, you need to remember that what worked in one place does not necessarily work here, as I found out myself. So the general rule is, if your bulbs flower in the spring, you want to plant them in the fall. Narcissus, tulips, iris, hyacinths, and many more should be planted in the fall. And as a side note, narcissus, jonquils, and daffodils are all related and part of the narcissus family of bulbs. We're not going to discuss the finer points of these distinctions, but I say this to you. If you like the look and you have the right place for it, grow it and be happy. And if it flowers in the summer, plant them in the spring. I just love caladiums in pots, and they come in such a nice variety of colors. I also saw a dramatic display this year of white caladiums lining both sides of a path leading uphill from the street to the front entrance of a house. And every time I drive by, I wonder if there was a wedding there this summer because it was quite the pathway. Typically, caladiums will not survive the winters here. So unless you have a microclimate in your yard, you may want to dig them up in the fall and store them in a cool, dry place until spring. Confused? Don't fret. Again, the UGA publication in your resources list in the chat box has a handy detailed planting chart of the different types of bulbs and when to plant them. And if and when you purchase bulbs, read the label. It'll let you know when, where, and how to plant. So many plant problems would be solved if we just read the label and followed the instructions. I know, I sound like I'm talking to my husband. Having the proper soil conditions is absolutely essential to growing bulbs of all kinds. And here are the top 3 conditions to remember. First, bulbs do not need much fertilizer. Second, they don't like wet soil. They will rot. Third, a pH is best between 6 and 7, so slightly acidic to neutral. And how do I know if my soil is right for bulbs? Well, you take a soil test. And you can do this by bringing samples to our local extension office. It costs $9 per test. And to make it easier for you to know what to do, we've added a link to our YouTube channel video on how to take a soil test. It's short and sweet, takes less than 3 minutes, and will show you how to get accurate results. Remember, good drainage is key to keeping your bulbs from rotting away. So what do? Well, you dig a hole about 1 foot deep, at least 1 foot wide. I suggest doing this first thing in the morning or before you go to bed so you have a convenient time to check the results. You fill the hole with water. If the water drains away in 8 to 10 hours, then the soil will grow most bulbs. If not, you need to find another place, or better yet, amend the soil to improve the drainage. So how do I do that? Well, be sure to incorporate 2 to 3 inches of organic matter or compost to a depth of 10 to 12 inches of clay. Compost or shredded pine bark will help drainage. And if you attended our last Grow Virtually session on making soil amendment, you can save money by making amendment at home and reduce the landfill waste. And this is the time of leaves, so this is a great time to start if you've never done that before. If not, you can purchase soil amendment by the bag or truckload at local suppliers. The goal is to break up the clay around the bulbs enough to allow the bulbs to stay relatively dry and not soaked for long periods of time. Also, breaking up clay with soil amendment helps release the micronutrients that are bound up in the very tiny clay particles, making them available for all of your plants to be happy. And I always say, mulch is the magic. Is there a particular way to space bulbs? Well, you can pick your preference. Bulbs can be planted individually or in a dug bed. Random planting gives a more naturalistic look. Some gardeners like to just toss the bulbs in a space and use that as their guide. Remember, if they're happy, they will be fruitful and multiply over time. So if you're a patient gardener or want to conserve your hard-earned dollars, you don't need to buy hundreds of bulbs at once and learn the hard way, like I did. Do I need special tools to plant bulbs? Well, that's up to you. The important thing to note is to dig to the proper depth of the hole. Some tools are marked with measurements, so that can help. You can also measure your garden trowel and draw the inches and permanent marker on the sides, or just remember how tall it is. But here is where knowing what type of bulb, and I say that in quotes, you have is very important. There is a simple rule of thumb. For bulbs and corms, plant at a depth 2 to 3 times the width of the bulb for bulbs 2 inches or more in diameter, and 3 to 4 times for smaller bulbs. This means a 3-inch wide jonquil bulb should be planted 6 to 9 inches deep, and a 1-inch crocus corm needs to be planted 3 to 4 inches deep. Make sure that the basal plate is down. The depth of the hole is measured from the top part of the bulb to the surface of the soil. Rhizomes, as in canna lilies, bearded iris, Solomon seal, and others, and tuberous roots, daylilies and dahlias, are planted on their sides. You need to plant rhizomes 1 to 2 inches deep. Don't bury them deep like true bulbs or corms. Be sure that the plant's eyes are pointed up. You can space plants as recommended on the plant label and also consider the effect in the landscape. How often are you going to divide them? Remember, you can scatter them, plant them in groups, space apart, but avoid one-line rows. Nature just doesn't do one-line rows. After planting, press the soil firmly around the bulb. Water deeply and apply mulch. 1 to 2 inches of rain per week is a good amount to get your bulb started. 5 gallons of water per square foot per week also works if you water by hand, which is about 1 minute on a typical garden hose. One of the nice things about bulbs is that they don't need much attention to grow. Your spring blooming bulbs need to be fertilized in the fall and again in the spring when the shoots emerge. There are special formulations for bulbs, but that isn't really critical. The critical thing is using a balanced mixture of equal parts nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, the 3 numbers on the label. High nitrogen fertilizer, which is the first number, is not what you want to feed your bulbs. Do not put fertilizer in the hole. You want to top dress your bed of bulbs with a 10-10-10 mixture at 1 to 2 pounds of fertilizer per 100 square feet. Again, it's in your publication. Use slow release fertilizer in the fall to slowly feed the roots, and apply a water soluble 10-10-10 in the spring. Do not fertilize bulbs when the plants are blooming or right after they bloom. Bulbs of all kinds, if planted in the right place, will give you pleasure for many years to come with little care. Some, like iris and canna lilies, can actually become invasive. And that's a signal that it's a good time to dig, divide, and give the bulbs to friends, family, or the squirrels. Also, if you notice that the plants are still growing but not flowering as much as they used to, it's also a signal to dig them up, divide, and replant. Gardens are living systems and change over time, so what worked in year 1 may not work as well in year 10 as other plants have grown around them. But that's what I love about gardening. There's always something changing and something that you have to change. Ah, yes, back to the tulips. So let's just be safe and say that tulips, unless you're lucky to have just the right conditions, tulips are annuals here in our climate. Experiment small before you spend big, or find something else you like and is less risky to plant. Too hot or too cold, sometimes you just can't win. However, I have had success keeping both dahlias and elephant ears over the winter because they grow in a protected area, not caladiums. Dahlia tubers can stay in the ground if they are in a microclimate and heavily mulched over the winter. They do best if divided annually, though. Climate change has altered some of the rules in our 7B climate zone. So some plants that were only suitable for zone 8 and above are surviving here, but don't take that as a given. Bulbs are pretty hardy and resistant to many pests and diseases. Ah, yes. Here's where I get back to my tulip mystery. So unless you came in late, remember I spoke about my 300 plus tulip bulbs that disappeared between sometime in late November, early December, and spring. Well, that remained a total mystery to me until a few years ago at one of our monthly Master Gardener meetings. I wish I could remember the speaker's name and topic because I have her to thank for solving my mystery disappearance. Did I plant at the proper depth? Check. Did the soil drain properly? Check. Was there any evidence of a tunneling creature underground? Nope. Were there obvious holes indicating they were dug up by some nefarious creature? No. I was stumped until I learned more about squirrels. The squirrel pellet is quite fond of tulips and crocus as well. But how did they know they were there? They didn't. In fact, the tulips were planted in my front yard and the squirrels hang out most of the time in the back. But what I learned from our speaker is that over the course of the winter, squirrels will wander around looking for their stores of nuts or whatever, and they don't have 100% recall. So if they see an area that looks disturbed in the yard, they say, Eureka, I found it. And in my yard, they hit the lottery. Since we were new to the property and this area, I must not have tamped down the soil well or mulched much, and the winter leaves just covered over the evidence. So what to do? Well, there's a few things you can do. First, you need to make sure that the area you planted does not look disturbed in any way. Tamp down the soil, evenly mulch, and make sure that it looks like the surrounding area. An even better remedy is to encase your bulbs between 2 layers of 1-inch poultry mesh. To do this, you dig down 1 inch deeper than the planting depth, unroll the mesh, cut it, hold it down, add the soil, the 1 inch, plant your bulbs, cover with the rest of the soil, layer another layer of mesh over the soil, and then replace the rest of it and mulch. And you can go, a couple of inches down from the top with the second layer of mesh. Again, the biggest problem we have here with bulbs, besides temperature and climate, is also too much water, which causes the bulbs to rot. And here are pictures of some bulbs that we know do well in Georgia. Agapanthus, or African lily. They're originally from South Africa and make a great focal point in the garden. They come in blue, purples, and white. Standard varieties can get several feet tall, but dwarf varieties are up to 20 inches and do very well in pots. They need full sun and bloom through the summer. They attract hummingbirds and other pollinators and are quite the display in a mass planting. Narcissus varieties are easy to grow, come in different colors of mostly yellows, whites, and some pinkish tones. They're large or small flowers, all different sizes, and they look fabulous under trees and on slopes. Most bloom early before tree leaves pop out, so they capture sun in typically shady spots. If you live in or near Smyrna, you can actually buy bags of jonquils from the recycling center here on Lake Drive at a cost of $20 for 40 bulbs as part of the Keep Smyrna Beautiful project while supplies last, and I haven't checked there to see if they still have them there now. They start selling them in October. Next one, Lycoris radiata. They can grow up to 30 inches tall. They're also in yellow, and they may need to be staked, obviously that tall. They like full sun to afternoon sun. They bloom in late summer, and if they are happy, they will spread. The red spider lily is actually native to Japan, so don't confuse these with the native spider lilies. Plant bulbs about 9 inches apart in the fall, with the top 1/4 inch of the neck of each bulb exposed. This is not the same as for other bulbs. Plants appreciate even moisture during their growing season, but may be best sited in areas where the soils remain relatively dry during the summer dormant season. Plants will naturalize by bulb offsets and form small colonies over time. Plants are best left undisturbed in the soil. The foliage of the spider lily emerges in the fall and remains evergreen throughout the winter before dying back in the late spring. All right, I need to look at my notes here for the proper pronunciation. Colchicum, I hope I said that right, is also called the autumn crocus, and they are fall blooming flowers and are typically in white or lilac. The flowers can appear suddenly without any foliage at all. If you buy them, plant them immediately. They can bloom without being planted. They grow 4 to 12 inches high. It's a corm, and their corms are quite large and should be planted 3 to 6 inches deep. Colchicums are well suited to growing under deciduous trees or shrubs or mixed in with other perennials, but will do best in full sun when they're in leaf. Colchicums prefer well-drained soil that doesn't dry out in the summer. So if you put them in a pot like I did, be sure to keep them watered like I didn't. We were away, right? Went away right after I planted them, and we didn't get any rain in October. Colchicums will slowly spread over time. To produce more bulbs for your garden, dig and divide them in midsummer when they're dormant. Colchicum is a good pollen source for bees in the fall when little else is available to them. Crinums are a member of the Amaryllis family, and like Amaryllis, are grown mostly for their flower stalks. They love it in the South, and they like full sun to light shade. They produce lily-like flowers that grow up to 4 inches wide and long, and they bloom in clusters in the summer to 3 to 4 feet tall above a clump of strap-shaped green leaves. The flower colors are mostly whites, pinks, and reds. Most flowers are fragrant. Crinum bulbs are large and taper into elongated necks. And next we have cyclamen. Cyclamen corms are great for growing in shady areas and naturalize well, and they are deer tolerant. They're native to Western Asia and Southern Europe. In the wild, they typically grow 4 to 6 inches high in late spring with fall blooms. They're much smaller than the florist cyclamen. They like dry to medium moisture conditions, so don't plant them in a boggy area. So that concludes our presentation on bulbs.
We hope that you will find our information informative and helpful. Thanks for watching, and please remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel.